I'm Debora Almeida, and professor at the Brasilia University, and a visiting scholar here in Colombia at Political Science Department with Professor Nadia Benat. And Gisela will present herself, but she's professor in FLACSO, Mexico. And we first would like to thank so much the Center for Mexico and Central America, the ILAS, for hosting this event, especially Nara Milanet, for all the effort to make this presentation happen, Ana Oropeza and Ana Cardenas for assisting us. And Gisela and I were going to alternate the presentation, try not to bore you so much. And just to say that this book is part of the Element series of the Cambridge University, which Vicky Murillo is one of the coordinators, the director here of the ILAS. And our main question is how, Gisela, please. Yes, our main question in this book is how feminist movements are able to respond or have responded to conservative threats. So this element makes an overview of the feminist literature on the first section, which we will not develop here because of time. But this revision of the literature will help us to understand how what are the main disputes and conflicts among feminism in the region. And also from this literature that we took some analysis or dimensions of our analysis. So, and to answer these questions about conservative threats and also the feminist resistance, we propose a comparative study of two very diverse cases, Mexico and Brazil, during almost 2 decades, 2000, 2018, at least. We extend a little bit more because Mexico has changed a lot, the scenario in the last 2 years. But we try to explain at least until 2018, and 2 decades of relationship between the feminists and the state. They are two countries very diverse in characteristics, especially considering the institutional design and the political parties, the federalism design, and also the religion issues. So, but at the same time, this diversity helps us to generate hypotheses for future research and compare all the countries and other regions also. And considering this diversity of the feminism, we focus only on a single issue, abortion. That's a doctrinal issue, and feminism is also very diverse. If you change it from one subject to another, the networks are different and they act completely different. You know? So we are now want, for example, to study the political rights. If you see the network in political rights in Mexico and Brazil, they are completely different if you see the network on abortion rights in both countries. So this is why we're focusing only on a single issue. And we did a qualitative research. It's a very relational approach that challenges us because we have to consider many factors and variables that impact the activism. And you made the network analysis and you made the semi-structural interviews, more than 90 interviews in both countries with feminists. So Gisela will explain our analytical contribution and conceptual contribution. I just would like to mention and to start that we started this research with a very conviction that Mexico was a success case and Brazil was a failure case. So, but because Mexico had approved abortion rights in Mexico City at that time, Brazil did not advance abortion rights, even if they had 4 terms of left party in federal government. But when we deepen our analysis, we start to see that there was more to be explained than this simple dichotomy between success and failure. And especially if you consider that feminists are not acting alone. They are facing a huge opposition from conservatives in both countries, in Latin America and around the world, we can say that. So at the same time they are acting to advance rights, they have also to act to prevent that conservatives may approve conservative legislation. So this relational approach makes us to see the case in a different way. So this is why Gisela now will explain the concept.
Well, thank you, Debora. Hello to everybody. Well, to answer the question that Debora presented, how feminists face conservative actors, particularly in the abortion issue, we propose the concept of feminist nested networks, defined as a space of social relationships that alternates dynamically between separation and incorporation of distinct actors into a standard set of repertoires. What we want to mean with this? In the field of network analysis theory and informatics, nesting is defined as incorporating functions or procedures within others by including various levels of parentheses. Then different feminist currents, like, for example, radical feminism, autonomous feminism, indigenous or Afrofeminism, these currents we propose that can be thought of as part of the broader feminist field in the same terms of parentheses that can be incorporated and disincorporated from the formula without resigning their own identity and without destroying the general sense of the formula. Then we analyzed the incorporation, the exclusion, fragmentation and coordination, conflicts and articulations among different subsets of feminist networks and their changes during a period with this idea of parentheses that can be incorporated and disincorporated. Then we conceive that feminist nested networks have two possible effects in front of conservative actors. They can enable pro-abortion agenda, for example, obtain the approval of the legal interruption of pregnancy, as in the case of Mexico City Local Congress in 2007, or they can block the anti-abortion agenda, as the case of the Brazilian feminist nested networks that were able to block more than 100 conservative bills that look to approve rights for the unborns in the Federal Congress since 2008 until now. Then, to understand how feminist nested network work, we disaggregate them into 3 dimensions with respective subdimensions. Okay, here we can see the dimensions and the subdimensions. The first dimension, the horizontal dimension, refers to the dynamic within society, within the socio-cultural space occupied by actors, organizations, and social movements, and comprises 2 subdimensions. The intersectionality subdimension relates to disputes arising from different conceptions of inequality. Seeing these inequality conceptions as issue exclusively associated with the contrast between universal women and men, or as a broad question following situated variables referring to ethnicity, race, and class. So in concrete, we investigate the extent to which classical pro-gender organizations are present in the network in contrast to those advocating for Black and Indigenous women interests in Mexico and Brazil. And On the other hand, the sexual identity subdimension includes conflicts emerging from the clash between a binary gender identity and the more fluid performance sexualities and related to deep theoretical and pragmatical political discussions of biology and culture, which include distinctions between gender and sexuality, bodies and discourse, etc. And in concrete, here we compare the structural position of LGBTQ+ organizations when present with that of traditional binary organizations. Well, the next dimension, that is the last in the table, is related with state feminism. The vertical dimension analyzes the relationship between feminist networks and the state. We identify 3 key subdimensions to address the complexity of the state. First, the 3 branches of government that are executive, legislative, and judicial. This separation of powers is typical of any state under a democratic regime. This is, of course, also the case of Mexico and Brazil during our analysis period. But also we include the dimension of territory. Of course, the notion of domination implies that the state is warranted control over a circumscribed territory to consolidate sovereignty. Okay, and the last, in this case, we observed how feminist organizations are related or not with the state at the subnational levels. You know, both Mexico and Brazil are federal state, and the pro-choice networks' capacity to expand their reach in relation to anti-abortion networks across the territory differs markedly in each case. And third, the subdimension of population. We know that in addition to controlling territory, domination entails control over people and the physical bodies living within certain borders, with the state regulating life and death using gendered codes. So in concrete, we question the feminist connection with governmental areas working with marginalized populations, particularly indigenous and Afro groups, in relation to dominant population, white, urban, wealthy groups. So the last dimension is the intermediary dimension. We assume that the horizontal and the vertical dimension are not connected automatically. They are intermediated by political parties and participatory arenas as councils and conference. Particularly for the Brazilian case, this intermediation of participatory arenas was had crucial role in the feminist nested network. Okay, the precise form of the networks adopted in each country is a result of a path dependence related to the way feminists were able to access the state and the political regimes. in our cases, particularly during the democratic transitions, and Debora will explain more about this. But in short, we argue that in Mexico, the democratic transition focused on party alternation, warranting free elections and a competitive party system after the Partido de la Revolución Institucional, el PRI, ruled for 70 years. Then feminist actors were particularly interested in incorporating their activism and agenda within parties. And in achieving this, they needed to build an inter-party coalition focused on non-doctrinal issues. What this means, it means they had to privilege a feminist agenda that doesn't pursue issues that generate deep conflicts, as in the case of abortion. So they were not involved in doctrinal issues, and they were more involved in non-doctrinal issues, as for example, the advancement of women political rights. On the contrary, in Brazil, in a democratic transition centered on social movements that fought against a dictatorship, with strong connections with a left party located at the municipal level, at local level, and defending a participatory project and a constitutional reform. In that situation, the feminist movement was able to fight both for doctrinal and non-doctrinal issues. It focused more on and this Brazilian feminist network focused more on the participatory project and in the access to the executive once the left party won the federal government. So this is the general historical path-dependent argument, and Debora will show more about this. So, okay, with this framework in mind, we obtained several lessons. So I will share these main lessons regarding the horizontal dimension, and Debora will talk more about the vertical and the intermediary dimension. Well, what did we learn about the horizontal dimension regarding the inner social space of the feminist nested networks in Mexico and in Brazil? Well, in short, we learned that the networks were more pluralistically nested in the case of Brazil than in the case of Mexico. And we also learned that plurality, when it's articulated, strengthens the feminist movement in front of conservative actors. In short, we learned that the networks were more pluralistically nested in the case of Brazil and in the case of Mexico, and that plurality, when it's articulated, strengthens the feminist movement. And it is important because within the feminist movement, we can find theories and activisms today that argue that plurality weakens feminism. In other words, for example, the so-called radical feminism today propose that to speak beyond the term of woman, even to speak beyond a biological woman body, and to designate and to include, for example, LGBTQ or intersectional subjects as feminists. So they propose that this inclusion weaken the political feminist subject, that is, for them, woman. And we find the opposite. Articulated plurality strengthens feminism in front of anti-abortion conservative actors, particularly in the case of Brazil. we find the following differences between feminist nested network in Brazil and Mexico. First, these are graphs derived from the network analysis. We have two graphs. At the right, the graph of nested networks in Mexico, and at the left, the graph of Brazilian feminist nested networks in Brazil. Okay, the points in the graph symbolize organizations, and the lines collaborative relationships among feminist organizations. I can later explain how we build this information through in-depth interviews using a name generator tool to obtain this information. But now I want to show that Mexican feminist network has more sub-networks than the Brazilian one. You can see at first glance this as follows. The Mexican network has 28 subcomponents, including 11 nodes that are not connected to each other. On the contrary, Brazil has only 3 components. So the Mexican feminist nested network is more fragmented than the Brazilian network. And on the other hand, maybe you can notice that the points within the graphs have several shapes. Each shape indicates another type of organization. For example, circle in a box means connecting organizations, double triangle, international organization, upward triangle, organization working on classic gender issues, and diamond, intersectional organizations, and so on. What we find seeing these shapes? Well, analyzing the percentage of each type of organization and their position in the whole network, we were able to know that in the case of Mexico, the proportion of intersectional organizations are less than in the case of Brazil. And also we could see that the organizations, for example, fighting for indigenous women rights or feminist indigenous organizations are located in more marginal positions in the network in Mexico than in Brazil, but more important, in Brazil, we find that Afro-Brazilian, or as is called in Brazil, Black women organizations are more than indigenous organizations, and are located in more important or more crucial positions within the network in Brazil. And we also find that LGBTQ+ organizations have a relative similar proportion in Mexico and Brazil, but we find that a difference connection and fragmentation in Brazil and Mexico. In Brazil, they are more connected, they are more articulated, or practically they are fully connected within the network, and in Mexico, no. In Mexico, we find a lot of LGBTQ organizations, particularly lesbian feminist organizations, that are very disconnected from the rest of the network and that hold separatist, abolitionist, and radical positions, excluding trans feminist organizations. And we find also in within important articulation or connecting organization of the network organization as women in plural, mujeres en plural, that hold also a position, a binary position. They argue that parity could not be in agreement with a more extended concept of a political subject, that it can not go beyond the term of woman. So, and finally, we find that the articulating organizations or connecting organizations that are, we define this organization as network of networks, are very different in Mexico and Brazil. We find that, and Debora will, I think we will show this again. We found that the main organization that articulate that is between organizations that are not connected each other, no? The main organization that is articulating the feminist nested network is women in plural, mujeres en plural. And in Brazil is the AMB, the Women Association of Brazilian, excuse me, the Brazilian Women Association, and they are very, very different. The AMB,
20 minutes. Okay.
They fights to defend several issues, both doctrinal and not doctrinal. No, they fight, for example, to defend the issue against gender violence, but they can fight also to achieve abortion law. In the case of Mexico, in contrast, Women in Plural is an inter-party organization that articulate women from all the ideological spectrum, and in this case, they all only fight to achieve political rights for women, and they avoid issues or topics that can broke the consensus within the network, within these articulating organizations. Then this give us different effects, different results in terms of the capacity to face conservative actors in terms of abortion. In the case of Mexico, after the 2007 law that allows abortion, that allows the pregnancy interruption, we had a strong backlash at the subnational level, and there were not an articulating organization that can organize the field against the conservative actors at the subnational level. And Debora will explain more this subnational level and these political differences between and capacities between Mexico and Brazil feminist nested network. Thank you.
Thank you, Gisela. Gisela explained the horizontal part of our analysis of the network. No, we are thinking feminism like networks that connect within itself, within movements, within the state, and also who are the actors that are connecting them and the intermediary between them. So the second dimension is the vertical one. That indicates how feminists interact with the states. It's important to state that the feminist literature has for a long time discussed this relationship between feminism and the state, but we saw that this literature mainly discusses feminism within executive branch, especially women mechanisms, women organisms, and we are defending here that if you want to see the relationship with the state, we have to consider the three branches together. How the feminists relate with the executive, with the legislative, and also the judiciary. And also considering account the size of Brazil and Mexico, a federal country, you have to consider how the feminists are also connected within the territory. So how the feminists are able to reach, especially subnational levels. And finally, the dimension of population, that is how the policies, gender policy or gender mechanisms, for example, reach the territory and also reach marginal populations or minority population. So when you compare both cases, it's like the vertical, it's like the inverse of the horizontal. While in Brazil, you have a very good plural horizontal network. Within the movement, we have a very poor connection with the state. And otherwise, in Mexico, we have a very close vertical connection between feminists and the state. It happened since the 2000s, since the democratic transitions, as Gisela said. So the feminists, what happened is that the feminists in Mexico invested so much in political parties. So to occupy political parties, they start building contacts with occupying legislative through elective posts, but also commissions and committees. They also occupy the executive administration, such as contact with the presidents from Mujeres, that is the Institute for Women in Mexico, and also contacts with the judicial branch. That is going to be very important now for many rights that they are conferring in the country. But for being in different political parties, you have to pay a price, no? So they could enter in different parties, but for that, it was necessary to build a basic consensus among feminists and establish agenda that is around no doctrinal issues, namely women's political rights, gender violence, and this network paid less attention to controversial issues such as abortion. It seems like a contrast, but they still approved abortion in Mexico City. But why they did that? Especially because this contacts in the three branch, a very centralized network. In that fight, it's important to the creation of a huge network that Gisela had mentioned, that is Mujeres in Plural, Women in Plural in 2009. But this network fight specifically for gender parity, for political rights. And they were successful, they achieved parity in the country. But the network for advancing abortion and reproductive rights, on contrary, was very small, centralized at the national level, and also in Mexico City. Without connections in the subnational level. So what happens is that because of their connection with Mujeres in Plural and also very powerful personal political contacts, they were able to promote a pro-choice agenda in Mexico City when the left party governed the city. And but this agenda was built by few women's rights advocates from GIRI and NGO, ECIS, the mainly organizations, who are able to successfully lobby local legislature to pass several exceptions on abortion. And in 2007, they approved the legal interruption pregnancy, the abortion rights in Mexico City. So this happens due their federal level contacts in the capital. And when the conservatives try, for example, reverse this activement in Supreme Court, they, because their contacts, the pro-choice activists also were able to block this attempt. But at the same time, this achievement provoked a very conservative reaction in the country. So in Mexico, they have more than 50% at that time of state Congress, 20 in 32, passed the laws, for example, recognizing the right to life from the moment of conception. It was a huge backlash, conservative backlash, because they approved the abortion right in Mexico City. And then the feminists were unable to block this because they were not spread in the country, in the territory, in subnational levels. And beyond electoral pressures, pre-once again elections, they were poorly connected in subnational level. Quotas law at that time were very uneven in the territory, and anti-abortion groups were very well connected with Catholic Church and the local elites. So they were unable to block this in subnational level. In Brazil, on contrary, features like a great case of horizontal network, but if you consider the relationship between feminists and the state, especially the tree branch, we can say that feminists have mainly accessed the state through the executive branch. So they have contact with the legislative, but it's not so much the relationship that they built with the Works Party and center-left parties and the executive branch, and also participatory institutions. In Brazil, that is very pronounced in councils and conferences, especially. So when feminists have it connecting with left parties since the democratization, and then what happens is that they professionalize like NGOs and became policy providers in local administrations. And then when the Works Party, that is a left party, center-left party, took the office, it was like natural that these feminists occupied high and mid-level positions in the state, began the institutional activism in federal government. So what happens is that during these years of PT, Works Party years, it institutes a women ministry for the first time in the country, Secretariat for Women Policy, reorganized the national councils and conference, who brought many civil society organizations into the state. So this conference is very important because they are not very powerful in terms of decision-making power, but they were very helpful to connect different kind of networks and organizations in the country. So they brought 2,000, 3,000 people in the national level to discuss an agenda on gender. So this was very important to spread the network in the subnational level, especially. And they have some councils also in the states, in the cities, and women's secretariats increased a lot also during Works Party administration, also the national level, even with limits and not so much what you want. So in this scenario, they tried to approve abortion rights in Congress in 2005 and present a bill to the Congress, but at the same year, when they are installed a commission to discuss the abortion rights, the bill, PT was accused by many corruption scandals. Ben Salon scandal, who knows the Brazilian history knows very well this scandal. And he had to make many concessions for conservative and evangelical actors. So, of course, the proposal was defeated. And since then, in the Lula's second term in 2007, the conservative reactions began to increase in the National Congress. So while the connection with the executive was very strong, the network analysis shows a very limited presence in the legislative, depend exclusively on the connection with center-left parties. And feminists in Brazil are also very suspicious with the judiciary. And they felt that Supreme Court is very ambiguous in their political decisions. And also it could be a risk to create a relationship when, for example, the Supreme Court reject abortion rights, and then it could be very difficult to approve in the legislature. So the connection of the network with the Supreme Court is made especially by an NGO, ANIS, that is a very specialized in litigation. And it was responsible, for example, for the approval of the third exception, the anencephalia fetus in 2012. But judiciary was not there, like we say, the repertoire that feminists most liked in the country. So during all this time, feminists had to fight against a very conservative reaction. So in Lula administration second term, the conservatives presented 31 anti-abortion bills in Congress. And what intrigued us in that research is that why they didn't approve an anti-abortion bill if they have a majority in Congress. They have the president, Eduardo Cunha, that was an evangelical and who was responsible, for example, to open the impeachment process. So we had to understand that how the network worked at that time, and our answer is that they turned to be a blocking network. But how they did that, and why they could do that. So we explained that by the next slide, that is the intermediary dimension that Gisela already mentioned. So our explanation is like a historical causal explanation. We argued that there is an elective affinity between a specific type of access to the state and the specific features of feminist networks. So in both countries, the democratic transition improved the feminist movement's access to the state, but it did so differently. In Mexico, Gisela told, they had like a democratic transition that was focused mainly on party alternation. They had, considering that they have 70 years of pre-domination in the country. So this placed political parties and electoral politics at the center of the political scene. So in this context, the feminist movement prioritized the task of building a robust network and occupying political parties. So what gives them opportunity to won electoral positions, and they were very successful. The quota laws were approved in 2007. In 2014, the same network guaranteed the gender parity, became constitutional. 2019, it promoted and approved another constitutional reform that called parity in all, which made parity in the country mandatory for federal, state, and municipal level, and in the three branches. I think it's the most successful quota law in the world. In 2021, they could get new affirmative action for indigenous, sexually diverse, and disabled immigrant people. So, but different from Brazil, they didn't have this kind of participatory mechanism in subnational level spread of network. In Brazil, Brasilia democratization was not a return to old parties. It was like we call movementist transition, where social movements closely linked with center and left parties, and with a participatory project joined the opposition, changed the political regime. It was a different kind of transition. Then the movement took the opportunity to especially defend the constitutional reforms, social rights, labor rights, market security. And then the feminists were very connected with these left parties since the beginning, especially the Workers' Party that is considered like a movement party in the country. And these movements defend it's like while we are building a representative government in the country, the movements are defending participation, demand participation. Instead of representation, not that they didn't want political representation, but it was not the central issue for the movement. And this, we have the only a quota for candidates in Brazil, that is 30%. That's very ineffective. We never arrive in 30% of women in parliament. We have now the best scenario with 17 in the last election. But when we see, Gisela, the graph, when you see the graph of the intermediation, you can see, while in Mexico, the main intermediary is Mujeres em Plural, a very network specialized in political rights, that is very connected with the main parties, the PRI, PAN, PRD, and Morena. It's the main intermediary network. And Supreme Court also is very strong intermediary actor. And we will see that why the Supreme Court became so important in Mexico now, especially nowadays. But when, then the strong presence in the parliament, parties, quotas, and access to the state actors has guaranteed the approval of abortion rights in Mexico City. And now we can see in other states. But in Brasilia, the graph of Brazil, we are finishing, we see that we show that the main connectors of the network are two left parties, PT and PSOL, Works Party and Socialism Party, and the AMB, that is the Brazilian Women Articulation. That is an organization that is in 19 from 27 states. Like if you ask any feminist in Brazil, it's like I am from AMB. It's like the main connecting organization in the country. And the Works Party also embraced this feminist movement since its formation. You can see the feminism always was inside the Works Party. Now they began, especially the youngest one, began to turn to PSOL, that is more leftist than PT. So to finish, you can see that for blocking, Brazilian feminists use these connectors. First, the horizontal connector, they use it to call for protests when the Congress mobilized against the agenda. We had like a feminist spring also when Eduardo Cunha tried to approve a bill that was like very dangerous for reproductive rights. And this very small number of women in parliament with institutional activists from the executive, what they did was to use the president and his party to pressure when any deputy tried to put some amendment or bill that goes against the women's rights. So it's a small network in the Congress, but it's very smart because they use like techniques of institutional rules in their favor to advocacy. So PT did not openly approve the abortion, but it also does not openly criminalize abortion. So it serves like a very good intermediary because the coalition to push the deputies to support, for example, the women when necessary. And it is working until now. You can say even with Bolsonaro, 4 years, during Bolsonaro, I have a student that is studying the conservatives present 61 anti-abortion bills in Congress. They did approve because of that very smart network that connect horizontally in the country and push and pressure the deputies when necessary. So finally, I think you can finish. It's like what we have is that we have a very not good enable network in Brazil, but a very powerful blocking network because of these connections. And in Mexico, we have a very good vertical and powerful network that could approve abortion rights, but it can have problems when the conservative came with strong force, especially in subnational levels. And finally, our conclusions. Gisela, you can, if you want to finish.
Yeah, just to summarize, I think very briefly. Well, the first lesson is that plurality is strange. Feminism in face of conservative actors, particularly with there are coordinating organizations that organize the diversity in the network. Second, the access to the state is central. Maybe could be trivial for you to listen to this conclusion, but within the feminist field, theories and also we have activisms that discuss strongly that state could be central for feminist struggles. Even they argue that the state weaken also the feminism. So our evidence shows the opposite. Of course, political parties have a key role, but with paradoxical interchanges between enabling and blocking results. And finally, of course, the best scenario for confronting conservatives is a combination of vertical, horizontal, and intermediary dimensions, well articulated. And we learned that not Mexico nor Brazil were cases that have a good articulation in all the dimensions. We are exploring now other cases, as the Argentinian case that seems to show a very good articulation through all the three dimensions, and it could be very interesting in the future to compare more cases with those that we analyze. Thank you very much. Let's go to the questions.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
So, well, first of all, thank you. It's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to read the book. And it's also very good to be speaking about Brazil and Mexico and South America in general, like in Latin America, on a more optimistic framework, I think, than we have been the last few years. I don't know a lot about Mexican history, but like I'm doing my PhD in Brazil, so I've read some about Brazil, and I was quite. I mean, you reached a very unusual conclusion from what I was expecting, at least. And I wanted to hear more about the role of this history of like participatory, like tentatives and institutions regarding the result or your interpretation of what happened to social movements. Because I would think, from a theoretical perspective, that participatory institutions would create more of an enabling, so like setting, right, of like being more propositive about how to, because that's the whole point of participating, right? Like putting forward like, new agenda or new ideas and not actually blocking. Whereas a network that is more connected through parties would work, I guess, like from a theoretical perspective, a lot more like would be a lot more prepared to block like these kinds of things, right? Because it's already like very well connected within institutions. So I just wanted to hear more about like if there is any influence from these different historical backgrounds that both countries have, and how is this connection? Because it sounds a bit odd, like from an educator perspective, I suppose.
Well, for us, it was a very challenging result also, because I remember Gisela couldn't understand how they couldn't pass this in the Congress, because they have Eduardo Cunha, they have the majority of Central, that is very pragmatic and not right, and then neither left parties. And also they have a very powerful movement. But what we saw is that the participatory institution was fault, at least the councils, to make policy decisions, right? So to propose policy decisions. But in that case, especially, we are considering an issue that was not, they didn't have this power. Because in the case of Brazil, this is also a difference that we didn't talk here, but it's in the book. In Mexico, we can have a state legislation for abortion. In Brazil, no. Why? Because in Brazil, the abortion right, the right to life is in the Constitution.
Okay.
So you cannot rule. In Brazil, we have federalism, but in fact, the state can do almost nothing. No, it's very centralized federalism. So because we have a right to life in the Constitution, it's not a matter of participatory institution can do or state can do. So you need at the same time a very huge coalition of political parties and movements to approve that in Congress, consensus on society. But at the same time, it would also need a huge support to approve a negative bill that withdrawal rights are at one for the movement. So this is why it was so difficult, the discussion of, they try in the December now, they try to approve in the commission, the Women Commission, for example, the Estatuto do Nascituro, yes, Unborn Statute. But it didn't pass in the commission. The feminist was there and they tried to block using institutional rules of the commission and present amendments, because it's also one unborn statute, for example, could withdraw rights and right compensation. We have 3 exceptions in Brazil. In case of rape, facts with anencephaly, and in risk of the women. So approve one thing like that would remove rights. So it's not so easy also to have a huge coalition for that. And participatory institution doesn't have this kind of power to discuss the issue of abortion. But it was very powerful to connect the movement.
I see.
I want to add just, in short, I think Mexico has to learn a lot from Brazil, and Brazil a lot from Mexico, because participatory institutions allow or gave a broad horizontal network for Brazilian that is related with their capacity to block conservatives, to mobilize in the streets, for example, against the Amber bill, that Debora mentioned, but they had not enough power from top down perspective. You understand? I am clear. Okay, and the opposite happened from Mexican feminism. they have a good power from top down perspective, but they have not enough power to make a national front with connections in all the subnational levels and with marginal or intersectional and LGBTQ organizations. So this is, I think, the main interesting lesson to compare these two diverse, very diverse cases. It's
They
okay?
Because they are well connected with the judiciary. Now we have 3 good decisions in Mexico regarding abortion rights too. But we don't, judiciary is not so guaranteed. See the United States now the decision. So we need a powerful movement to defend when the conservative threats came. So this is, I think, this is why in the last section we explored the Argentina case, because the Argentina case is amazing. They are good in the 3 connections, the three dimensions. Okay. Is there a question in this one? No.
There is someone that one.
Hi, I'm from Argentina. So I'm very you should do this from like this analysis about the Argentinian networks. But I have 2 questions about what you spent today, and is if you can tell us a little bit more about which was the role of academy in these networks. I don't know if you find something about that. And then the other question was, what do you think was the effect of COVID-19 of the pandemic in these networks? Thanks.
Great. Thank you for the question. Very, very interesting question. Academy. Oh, well, we did an analysis, for example, within the articulating, the connecting organizations, the AMB and the Women in Plural, Mujeres en Plural. In Women in Plural, we find that a huge percentage, I remember almost 70% had a top academy trajectory. So, and the pro-choice network that is very, very, very small, and also, for example, here, the coordinator is Marta Lamas, that I don't know if you know, is a very recognized feminist, but also is a top level academic scholar in UNAM, no, in the National Autonomy University in Mexico. So what this information is telling us that the networks that are located in central positions within the network have an elite future, an elite characteristic. You understand me? So this is more present in Brazil. Also, you have academic trajectories within the network, but you have also, for example, leadership from the Black women, Mujeres Negras movement that have not this kind of academic trajectory. No, some of them have, but some of them don't have. No, so this shows it shows that the Mexican nested networks, at least central points within the networks, are more elitist. And the second, the COVID, I think that it was more important or more crucial, the change in the party system now in Mexico than the COVID. Because we have now a earthquake, a critical juncture. You understand? It's a before and later. Morena, for example, before 2018, the PRI had almost 300 seats in the National Congress, from 500 seats in total. And after 2018, the PRI have almost 45, 42 seats. Yeah, it's a huge, a huge loss of seats. And Morena has the majority and has the majority in a huge number of local congress, and has also a lot governments at the local level. So this, I think, is the change in the transformation variable. And the COVID, I think it's more related with also something that is happened, I think, now within the feminist network field, that is a generational transformation of leadership. For example, within HIRE, that is the NGO that occupies a very central point within the pro-abortion network in Mexico. We had a change of leadership that are younger than in the past, and they use a lot, for example, internet and virtual repertoires. So this, we saw that in some cases is helping to create more connections. That is very important, that for the Mexican case, no? That it's crucial for the Mexican case. For example, we are in a so new situation that we had a new opportunity window in 10 states to approve in the local legislatives a depenalization of abortion. Because Morena is majority, and you had there the opportunity to do this top-down strategy, because we had their feminist activists inside Morena in those states. You can follow me, my spectacular English? Okay, so in those cases, these new leaders, young leaders from the small centralized pro-abortion network, during COVID, they use a lot digital repertoires, strategies to connect with local organizations and particularly with local deputies, women deputies, that accessed the local seats through parity. So maybe COVID boost this young, strategies that are more nearest to to digital platforms, maybe, but I think it's not the central issue or the central change in Mexico. I don't know if I answer you. I don't see you, but I hope I answer you.
Say that also the academy is very crucial for the feminist movements in Brazil, and especially the better connection with the sexual identities like gender, LGBT. It's crucial because, different from Mexico, the university in Brazil has developed many sexual rights centers of studies. These help to connect these feminists with the classical organization. It was crucial. So we don't have this kind of dispute that's very clear in Mexico, like trans versus women. There are hardcore feminisms too, especially in digital platforms, but it's not an openly dispute that it's more common sense that we all have to accept each other. So this is because of the center created at the university, Center of Studies created at the university. And also, we had COVID in Brazil and we had Bolsonaro. So the Congress had to other measures to take care, like emergency assistance, and also all the process became online. They tried to pass other kind of good for them in terms of resources for deputies, and I think the conservative agenda was not the center of the stage at that time, even if they had many proposals of bills, but it was not in the center of dispute. And also, because of the Bolsonaro, the feminists had to unite among each other to elect Lula or to elect another president. It also helped to also strengthen the links between this different kind of feminism. So, and also digital activism. So it was, but not the streets. But also it didn't, despite the many presence of anti-abortion bills, it didn't have moments that they had to especially mobilize on the streets. And the advocacy network inside the Congress was like all the time monitoring and seeing what is happening. And when it was necessary, they called the organization, they came to Congress a lot, like happening at the end of the year, in the end of the legislature, they trying to pass something in the commission, women commission, but it was like an action, especially conducted by a very Catholic and anti-choice deputy that has like in his agendas. It's like 61 projects and 30 are from same person, same deputy.
Would you be accurate to say that in Brazil then all these laws or tentative laws that were trying to be passed during Bolsonaro's government especially were also a way to connect to his own like supporters more than actually a strategy to get it through most of the time?
Yeah, I think so. It was a strategy to show his base that he's doing.
Yeah, and keep them like engaged in these kinds of like very anti-choice movements that are really mobilizing, right? People engage in that.
I think so. It had this rule of mobilize, but I thought that it could be more. Fortunately, it was not, because but for the feminists, FEMIA is a huge NGO that it's specializing in legislative advocacy, and they monitor all the bills that pass in Congress. And not only abortion, but we had many rights that were withdrawn, the violence, the policy against violence of gender also were poorly coordinated and implemented during Bolsonaro government. So it's not only abortion. Even we had a Minister of Women that included the name family in the ministry. So it's with a pastor as his ministry. So it was many much actions that was backlash in the country beyond abortion. Sure. So if you don't have questions, we can finish. Thank you for being here. Thank you all the audience on the Zoom.
Thank you very much. Very interesting questions, and this is also, I think I want to stress that it's also a very for us was a very interesting work to articulate feminist governance and political sociology, network analysis, and more traditional political science, no, to try to give an innovative view over historical processes regarding feminist rights, and particularly feminist rights that face strong conservative attacks.
Where can we find the book?
Okay, in Amazon.
Okay.
You can, yeah, and you can find, of course, in Cambridge University Press, no?
Mm-hmm.
You can write. I am writing in the chat, of course, no? We can write to us. I don't know if Debora can write.
Yeah, I can share
her email.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing among the participants a lot, I think, Spanish speakers. So, and of course you can access to our websites, ResearchGate, and of course, but yeah, the book is in Amazon and Cambridge University Press, and you can also write to us if you have any problem to get the electronic book, or particularly the electronic book, no?
And it's going to be also be published in Spanish. I think next month.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, next month or 2 more months. We hope that we will have a Spanish version of the book. It will be the first element in Spanish. So yeah, we are very happy with this.
Okay, thank you. Bye, Gisela.
Bye, ciao, bye-bye. Have a nice day.